we're going to take this half time and actually divide it in half as well. The first is to open up a discussion around the current economic situation that these folks are seeing happen in their part of the world. And then the second half is going to be a discussion on how they see this either now or down the road affecting the people that we serve. And then we'll open it up to you all, okay? So I'll start with you, Martha. How would you, and then everybody else can chime in, look at the current economic turmoil and how it's affecting our donor community where you are?
I think I was asked to start this because I come from a country that just presented their national budget with a 1% of the budget spent to development assistance. So we are sort of... So we're of course happy for that, and I think it will be very difficult for them to go back on that because this has been a very high-profile thing. So this is a bit special, but of course this could be very different in other countries. And we have heard some, signals. Vice President Biden had some not so good remarks in his election campaign. Hopefully they were not already agreed on. But this is something that we don't really know. I think this will vary between different countries. When it comes to private funding, I think it's important that we don't get too negative and to try to keep the perspectives. Of course it is serious. It's serious that people are losing jobs. It's serious that we are having economic crisis and that we might be going into an economic recession. This is serious. But at the same time, we have to remember that in Germany, in Norway, in France, in UK, and in many other countries, there are still many affluent people. There are still many people who can afford to do a lot more than they already do. There are still companies making money. I mean, the margins are maybe slightly smaller than they used to be, but they are still making money. And we have to remember that. Right now, we are in the start of a crisis. This is also a psychological thing. But it's important that we also try to remind ourselves and people we meet that, okay, this is a serious situation, but we still have a lot of resources in our parts of the world. And a country like Norway, I mean, if we had 10% decrease in our national product, which is not going to happen, nobody predicts that, but still, if we had that, that would lead us back to 2003. And 2003 was not such a bad year. So we have to try to keep this perspective, I think. And also, I mean, even if the number of people who are willing to give money to charity and to development assistance, we must also remember that care still has a tiny portion of this market. And even if it shrinks, there are still ample opportunities that we have not tapped yet. So I think that if care manages to be out there, to tell stories that people can relate to show people how their contribution can make a difference, this implies a much more active media work, much more active advocacy work. But if we manage to do that, I think this conference has shown us with the potential we have, being a global moment, having all these stories, and we know that we're making a difference. If we manage to get through with that, I think that we will be one of the organizations that will be managed to go out on this other side of this crisis in not such a bad shape.
I agree. The issue is not so much a reduction of resources, but political. The issue is also an increase in demand, whereas the supply could politically shrink. And what I mean is this. For the past decade, Reality of Aid has been monitoring what we call also an index of stinginess, which means to say that if you look at the statistics, the growth of wealth, individual wealth in the North, has been exponential. But the growth in aid has not been, it's not even a plateau, it went down. And if you look at it per capita in Africa, it's really down. And so therefore there is a lot of potential. But the problem is, there is a lot of political problems. And the political risk is this. We could be overwhelmed by a different voice. And this happened to Japan. Japan is one country where you had recession for 10 years. And 3 years on their recession, Japanese development organizations really were overwhelmed with a tremendous public perception that Japan is suffering, they don't need to give abroad, and that is the reason why Japan's aid went down. And that is the danger if we let that kind of politics or the thinking. And it is a thinking that goes beyond the issue of aid. It's a thinking that also relates to how our peoples in the North look at the world. It is contrary to internationalism. It is where xenophobia, racism, and narrow nationalism thrive. And therefore, it is a general responsibility for CARE and a challenge for CARE and other international organizations to increase global development education for global citizenship. And it is by doing that that I think we will be able to unlock these resources that are actually there. And therefore, for me, that is not the challenge. The second danger is this narrow notion as well that with effectiveness, you don't need to give money to the northern CSOs. You just give them direct to the south. To a large degree, this is an uninformed notion. First, CSOs in the south do not have the capacity for fiduciary management. And this is something that's a challenge to CARE as well. Oxfam has already been doing work on this, on providing support to southern organizations for intermediation that would be empowering and strengthening the capacity of southern organizations to receive funds directly. In a sense, you're doing work to make yourself obsolete. But on the other hand, let's not be afraid of that, because the question is, what is the added value of CARE? Or the added value of international and northern organizations? And this is where a lot of work needs to be done, both on the responsibility for development education and in defining one's added value that explains why international organizations remain very important, not just now, but in the future.